Beowulf is a story of a king, riddled with many religious themes, some Christian and other Germanic pagan. Water is chaotic. With its waves and unpredictable storms, water can be a symbol of chaos and death. Water can be a symbol of not only chaos, but also death, as water is fluid like blood and fills life. While water is needed for life, life cannot survive in water. Just as death is needed to sustain life, we eat plants and animals to survive, though life cannot survive if it is fully immersed in death. A swamp is a fusion of land and water. It is an in-between place, a place between life and death, a hybrid of tame land and chaotic water. Similarly, Grendel is also an in-between, as he is in between man and beast. Heorot was built by a swamp, and also along the coast, the border between water and earth, or a frontier of life and death. This shows the fragility of Heorot and civilization. Civilization is never more than one generation away from extinction, and never more than a few days from death. This is later seen as Hrothgar's people grow happy and wealthy, and it all comes crashing down in an instant with Grendel's attack. Beowulf patterns after the Germanic theory of the universe. Both Beowulf and Germanic cosmology begin with the death of a king, then are followed with the rise of a king, and they end with the death of a king. Germanic mythology begins with the death of the giant Ymir, the rise of Odin, and then the death of Odin, whereas Beowulf begins with the death of King Scyld, the rise of Beowulf, and then his death. Heorot the Mead Hall was more than just a place that Germanic soldiers could get hammered. It was the pinnacle of their civilization. It was the symbol of the king's might and love, and also the respect of his people. Heorot was made by King Hrothgar for his people, but it wasn't made by just him. It was made also by the help of his people, working together. Heorot was a representation of a tamed world, or a higher form of existence, because it was a shelter from nature's chaos. If you are under a roof, you are no longer subject to the chaotic whims of the earth, such as wind, snow, and rain. A mead hall may not seem that special compared to skyscrapers or Egyptian monoliths. However, mead halls were divine to the Germanic peoples. The chief god Odin lived in the mead hall Valhalla. Buildings are a higher way of living, allowing people to create a new domain, protecting them from nature's chaos, like storms and winds. Similarly, societies are created to protect people from man's chaotic nature, his desire to kill at others' expense, to reproduce at others' expense, and to eat at others' expense. Societies make a higher way of living by defining theft, murder, rape, honor, and societal roles. Just as Heorot was built by Hrothgar's people working together, a society is built by individuals who work together to follow the framework of their laws. Societies are an intent to create a higher way of living. The pinnacle of existence is defined by a society's gods and their heavenly domain. If Odin, the creator of the universe, lived in a mead hall, wouldn't you want to live in one as well? A society is patterned after its gods. Heorot is patterned after Valhalla. Societies are man's flawed attempts to create heaven on earth. Religion and moral codes are the way of reaching divinity by subduing the beast from within. Christians often say, "What would Jesus do?" Similarly, Germanic peoples would have wondered, what would Thor do if he was confronted by a dragon? It was prophesied that Thor would be confronted by a dragon and the two would slay each other. When Beowulf was confronted by a dragon in his old age, he should have cowered, but he didn't, and he was slain. Beowulf died the same way as Thor, and similar to Odin. While Christian and Germanic values were very different, their gods were the pinnacles of divine living. Hrothgar's people lived in Heorot with much wealth and happiness. Their new society was a paradise. Heorot, Hrothgar's paradise, was disrupted, just as the Garden of Eden was disrupted by a snake, or when Cain had murdered Abel. Similarly, Odin and his kingdom enjoyed relative peace, until it was disrupted by Loki, who had murdered the god Balder, and sired a triad of destructive beasts. Fenrir the wolf of the swamp, Hel the queen of death, and Jormungandr the serpent. These monsters would slay many of the gods, and destroy the earth, destroying this paradise completely. Heorot's paradise is disrupted by Grendel, who came and savagely murdered many of Hrothgar's men. Hrothgar lamented. He couldn't be happy anymore, now that his people were suffering, and this paradise which he had tried to create had become a very chaotic place. So who was Grendel? And what is it that Grendel symbolizes? Of course, art is subjective, and you can oftentimes find many meanings behind certain symbols. Unlike math, where 2 plus 2 will always equal 4, you can find in art that there are actually an unlimited amount of answers, though there are some answers that make more sense than others. So who was Grendel, and what is it that Grendel symbolizes? Grendel is described as being in the wretched guise of man, but his behavior was contrary to that of a person. He was the most savage of beasts. You see, the higher way of living that Hrothgar had created could withstand the wind, the rain, the cold, and the sun, but there is one thing it couldn't hold itself against: people. Humanity has fought many perils: snakes, wolves, weather, hurricanes, pestilence, but of all the dangers to humanity, its biggest seems to be itself. Millions have died in the last centuries, not by some exterior force, but by wars, hate, and savagery. Often it comes in the guise and the shape of something friendly, but if you look closely, it is something much darker. Heorot could only be broken by that which crafted it. This kingdom, which seemed to be paradise, had transformed overnight by one character's vicious bloodlust. It has been said that civilization is but one generation away from extinction. No warrior was successful in fighting Grendel. Hrothgar prayed fervently to the Germanic gods, but they did nothing for him. According to the poem of Beowulf, or at least the version that I read, the Germanic gods could not deliver Hrothgar, as these gods were truly Satan. It is possible that this, along with a few other Christian references, were added later to the poem. Though regardless, we see a very powerful lesson in this symbol. Hrothgar's gods cannot help him, because they are the evil that vexes him. Oftentimes, as a society, we have issues, monsters if you will. Perhaps the means by which we try and destroy these monsters are the very causes of our problems. For example, imagine someone who's very depressed because they don't have any money and they lost their job, so they drink in an attempt to drown their sorrow. However, had they not shown up to work drunk, they wouldn't have been fired, and had they not spent their money on beer, they wouldn't be out of money. That isn't to say that the alcoholic is a bad man, but he cannot try the same thing and expect a different result. Beowulf is the new way, the new method. Beowulf comes and frees the people miraculously by defeating Grendel with his bare hands. He said that no weapon could defeat the beast, but only the power of God. Beowulf had slayed the beast from within. He had destroyed the savage beast which impeded the Germanic paradise. However, this was not the end. Grendel's mother was angry that her son had been killed. She lashed out with much more fury. Beowulf seeks Grendel's mother passing from the marsh, the transition between the tame land and the chaotic water. Grendel's mother lived in the water's depths. Beowulf fully immersed himself. He was swallowed by the jaw of the beast. He now wasn't fighting man, but evil itself. Grendel's mother could mean a host of many things: death, chaos, or savagery. Once again, Beowulf is aided, as he is led to a massive sword which he wields to destroy Grendel's mother. Beowulf's men, who were waiting outside the water, assumed that he had been overtaken, and were shocked to see him victoriously emerge. Beowulf then returns to his own kingdom, bringing his people to peace and prosperity. Once again, Beowulf is challenged, but this time the fight will claim his life. One of Beowulf's servants sneaks into the tomb of a deceased king and steals a goblet. This awakens a dragon who is slumbering there and who had appropriated all of the treasure. The dragon, infuriated, rains fire upon the kingdom. Beowulf brings several of his warriors to fight the dragon. All flee save one. Beowulf successfully slays the dragon, but is poisoned and dies a little later, similar to how Thor would successfully slay the dragon Jormungandr and only managed to take 9 steps before dying. The dragon was living in a barrow, or a king's tomb. It was customary to fill these barrows with the deceased king's jewels and other earthly possessions, sometimes even their ships. The Germanic peoples also believed in Draugr, who were evil kings that haunted their burial mounds and greedily guarded their gold, and they would protect it from anyone who would try and steal their treasures. Perhaps this dragon was also a deceased king, or maybe a living one who had transformed into a beast. This could be supported by the Volsung saga, which tells the story of a dwarf named Fafnir, who transforms into a dragon after being corrupted by a gold ring. Gold was a symbol of wealth, and a ring a symbol of kingly power. In other words, this dwarf had been transformed into a dragon by his greed and his lust for power. It seems to me that Beowulf's fight against the dragon was a fight against tyrannic rule. Grendel was a corrupted man within us all, or that is to say, our savage inclinations. Grendel's mother was pure death, the result of corruption, and the dragon was a type of corruption that comes from earthly power. Perhaps the dragon could be some foreign dictator, or possibly Beowulf's inner conflict as king. Maybe he was fighting his own earthly desires, losing his life in the conflict. Perhaps it was a symbol of how each of us will fight our own demons till the day we die. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please, don't like it, and whatever you do, do not subscribe.